Okay, I have fought through so many different technical issues in order to attempt to articulate the single point. So if anything's going to go wrong, I'm just going to press a bunch of buttons and get really mad and call it a day. Okay? So the first thing I wanted to show you really quickly is these are meant to be Romans, okay? This is a representation of Romans, and they're meant to be fighting in a style that is fairly typical for Romans for a good chunk of the Dark Ages. During the Republican era, they fought mostly with swords. During the Empire, they fought mostly with swords. Even the late Empire, it was mostly with swords. The spears were an exception. They were for various use cases. So I want you to very quickly take a note of these swords. Notice how from different angles, you can still see the swords. Even my low graphic settings, even with choppy recording, you can spot these swords. These are decently long swords. Now, take a note of these spears, okay? These spears are like 1.66 times a man's height. 1 2/3 of his height, something like that. Maybe 1.5, something like that. These are decently long spears. Notice how long they are. Okay? Now, let's go over here. Here's some barbarians. Spears of roughly the same length. We have some like peasants or bandits or things of that sort. Notice how they have these small weapons, and they're so tiny, you can't quite make out what they are. They're probably knives. Look how slender and thin they are. Let's go over to these barbarians, okay? These are meant to be medium infantry, not super heavy. You know, a bit fast, a bit light. You can kind of make out their blades. They're pretty small, they're pretty thin. Probably cheaper to make, probably simpler and easier to make. So I want you to very quickly think about how small those blades are. Hopefully you have optic permanence. I don't. Not really. I mean, I remember the things that exist that are not in the room, but I don't have a mind's eye. And then think about how big these blades are and how much thicker they look and how the light gleams off of them. Okay, that's my point. That's my first point. The right take. So, the plot has thickened. I've shown you images. Now I'm going to show you images that are not really moving. Boring images. So this is Warhammer Ancient Battle. This is the complicated parent system that I'm supposed to simplify into the system that I am the researcher and coder and writer for. Well, one of the coders, researchers, and writers for, okay? So, we have the hand weapons. It's the just basic weapon a person has. Clubs, hammers, axes, swords, yada, yada, yada. And then we have daggers. I think we saw some daggers in those pictures, improvised weapons. Now, as we're about to scroll down, we see that there's this barbarian here, and he has a spear. And I don't know if you noticed, but the spear is maybe, if we made that vertical instead of slanted, it at most is as tall as he is, if not shorter. So let's scroll down and see if we... Wait, what's this? Very common weapons, ubiquitous, thrown or retained, you can thrust in one hand, is shorter and lighter than a thrusting spear. And it's thrown immediately prior to hand-to-hand combat. When units were engaged, the people in the latter ranks would throw over the people in the first ranks. We don't treat these as missile weapons because they are not thrown very far. Yeah, this looks like a spear you could throw, but I don't think you could throw it at super long distance, so that sounds about right. Now, can we find the other spear in the rules somewhere? The longer one? Oh, what's this? Meant to be kept, thrust at people, 10 feet or longer. Well, about 1.5 man's height, or more, sounds about 10 feet. That sounds right. And the people in the first rank stab with it, and the people in the second rank stab past the people in the first rank. So I think we saw these two. Now, here's where the issue comes up. I don't think you can kind of sense the issue, but there's an issue here. This right here is a barbarian. Look how aggressive he is. He's got all his facial hair. He's angry. He's uncivilized. He's here to kill things and pillage and steal your cows and kidnap your daughter. And it's just a terrible experience. He's just here for who knows what he wants. He's just a vicious, violent man. Now, let's look at the Roman, okay? The Roman, this is perhaps the Republican era or the middle of the empire before that representation I showed where things really declined. He's got some dignity to him, okay? Look how he stands straight. He's wearing sandals. He's got a tunic. He's all dignified. He's clean shaven. And he's just prepared. You know, he marches. He stands put. And this guy runs into him. That's kind of the idea of what people think of when they think of the Roman. They think of, he stays put, he gets charged into. Well, the issue that we're basically going to be running into is this is not a thrusting spear. It's not long enough, and you can tell by looking at it. This is kind of a flimsy, weird-looking weapon. This is meant to be thrown at people. This is a pylum. So the issue that we're kind of running into, the issue we're running into earlier, is for a long time in the system, everybody could fight 2 ranks. And recently it was changed so that only spears could fight 2 ranks, and spears are basically the thrusting spear. And then I was like, okay, well then we have to put the throwing spear in. The throwing spear is good for charging, and barbarians love charging, so, and a lot of barbarians in the old rule list, they get throwing spears. And there's plenty of defensive infantry during the Dark Ages that have really long thrusting spears. But I kept thinking to myself, what do we do about this guy, okay? What do we do about him? Because, he's got a sword, and he doesn't really do anything cool in the system. And this is a very good sword at this time period. They get much longer. They're just as good later on, but they get longer. I'm basically sitting here going, he's got these long, expensive swords, and they don't do anything in the system. And then he's got a throwing spear, or even a heavy throwing spear, but this is good for charging, the way we run out the system. It's not meant for, people charge into him, he throws it at them. And so we basically have this big, huge issue where we have these dignified defensive infantry that couldn't be defensive because they don't have long enough thrusting spears. And they couldn't be super effective because the swords don't really do anything. And the throwing spear, the way it was written, was mostly for charging, not being charged into. It was more for, being an uncivilized barbarian, not being a civilized Roman. And the issue is this entire time it says when they charge or receive an enemy charge. So this guy, basically, I was super mad. I was like racking my brain, pulling my hair out, like, what's the solution? What's the solution? What's the solution? I'm talking to the guy. He's not really understanding me. And it turns out the solution's right here this entire time. Just let the Roman throw the pylum when he's charged into. I don't know if we want to give him the ability to throw it when charging into others. I don't know. But basically, there's a solution to the problem. There'll be other solutions. I don't want to make videos for them. This has been a huge ordeal. This is probably like a 25-minute video. I'm exhausted.